All right. Now I heard Clare Daly the other day talking about immigration and how the Irish government needs to not just maintain the current numbers but increase the numbers significantly. Not just Ireland, but Western Europe generally. That the answers to our problems really is to ramp up immigration ever more, to bring more and more people in, and that this is the answer basically. Okay. Now, when I heard this, I almost couldn't believe my ears because, you know, does she have any clue what she's talking about? I mean, she's a politician. You expect such people to be informed. You expect such people to know what they're talking about. But, the very worst thing you could do for the least well off people in society is to increase immigration. I mean, it's already bad enough with the current levels of immigration we have at the moment. It's already damaging enough for the working class. Okay, we only need to look at what's happening across the country. These unprecedented protests all over the place. Okay, and these have sprung up over the last 6 to 8 months. Okay, and this really is unprecedented. We have never seen this kind of thing before. We have seen occasional protests in regards to direct provision centres in the past, but never a nationwide, um, you know, movement essentially of people, with this Ireland is full hashtag saying, we're not accepting this. We are already struggling. We are already really struggling in terms of resources, in terms of housing, in terms of health resources, in terms of, education resources. The last thing we can deal with is an influx of two, three, 400 extra people into our community without any say so, without any consent, any debate whatsoever, often just sprung on people out of the blue, you know. And yes, there is the whole question of the fact that it's often people from the Middle East, the greater Middle East and Africa, people who are often culturally quite different to us. And that comes with its own challenges as well. So this is not like somebody from France or Germany just arriving over. This is big numbers of people from really quite different cultures coming in. So it's not surprising people will be concerned about that. But what Clare Daly is doing is saying, I want to make your lives even more difficult than they are already. That is her message to the working class people of Ireland. I want to make your lives even more difficult than it already is, okay, which has resulted in these protests, okay, against the large numbers of people coming in seeking international protection. Now, there is another question in regards to how legitimate are the people coming in terms of are their claims legitimate or not. We find that in many of the cases, in fact, the vast majority of cases, these are not legitimate asylum claims. But that's another question, to come to that again. Just in terms of sheer numbers, we already have severe pressure with the whole Ukrainian situation. But they are coming in as refugees. They've been given refugee status already by the UN, by the UNHCR. Okay, so in a sense, they have already achieved that level of, they are treated better, if you like. But also the people coming in to claim international protection are also treated, you could say, significantly better than the homeless people, for instance, and you could also say they're treated better than the existing working class people in their communities as well, because in terms of being given accommodation, given free meals, and given a medical card in many cases, free transport in terms of the Lewis and so on, and buses. I mean, you can see why people are not happy with this. There's several reasons why people would not be happy about what's going on in regards to this increased influx, and where people are being imposed in numbers of 200, 300, 400 with no consent whatsoever, with no prior discussions, plonked onto various towns and even villages in some cases, and communities around the country. I can completely understand why people are not happy with that. But what Clare Daly is doing, like I said, is seeking to make life even more difficult for those people. And what's going to happen? It's just going to result in even more protests. It's going to result in even more, frustration and annoyance amongst those working class people around the country, not just in Dublin, but in all the various towns around the country as well, where I've seen these Ireland is full protests. And if you just think about what she is advocating, okay, she wants to increase the numbers of people coming into Ireland. Okay, we've already had something in the league of 100,000 people who've come into the country over the last year or so. Okay, now if you continue at that rate, you don't need me to tell you you're going to have severe pressure, not just on the housing sector, okay, but also in terms of health resources, in terms of education resources, in terms of pressure on the transport network, just pressure on the country generally, pressure on the countryside, pressure on our natural resources. Like, there's all these reasons why it doesn't make sense to keep bringing more and more people into the country, There's also the whole environmental argument. If you care about the country in terms of the countryside, in terms of nature, in terms of the wildlife, in terms of natural habitats, in terms of natural resources, the very last thing you should be doing is wanting to increase the population. Okay? If you really care about those things, you should want to limit the population. All right? Clare Daly wants to ramp it up even more. We're already struggling as it is. She wants to make it even higher. And like I said, I've already said how that damages and undermines the working class people, and I haven't even come to the whole question of rents and house prices, which of course is going to go up when you have more and more people being brought into the country, because what's happening? Supply and demand. This is common sense. Okay, you got more demand for a particular service, in this case housing. What's going to happen? The price of housing is going to go up. The price of rent is going to go up. Clare Daly, is in favour of making rents higher for people who are already struggling at the lower end society, for making house prices even more unattainable, particularly damaging for the least well-off people in society. Also damaging for the middle class too, but more so for the working class, because they have less in the first place in terms of resources, So this is what's going on. And another thing to keep in mind as well, when you increase the population, and like I may have alluded to in the past as well, increasing the population in Ireland and much of Western Europe mostly comes from immigration. Okay, it doesn't tend to come so much from natural births within the country. It's mostly coming from immigration. So the increase in population across Western Europe and Ireland is coming from immigration predominantly. All right. Now, I already mentioned how this is very damaging to the least well-off people in society, in terms of housing, in terms of house prices and rents. But you've also got wage competition, because people coming in, many of them are going to be looking for work. So what happens? You get an increased pool of labour. What happens when you have an increased pool of labour? Employers, businesses are in a position to offer less in wages. So in general, you're going to get wage depression. Now, it's not going to be the same across all job sectors, but this is a general trend. What happens when you increase the pool of labour, you tend to get wage depression. And the people who are going to be most affected by that, again, the working class. This is what Clare Daly is advocating for. She's advocating for less wages for the working class, higher rents for the working class, even more expensive house prices, making them even more out of reach for the working class. She's advocating for increased competition for, precious health resources, precious educational resources. And, there's other reasons as well, which I haven't even come to. Like, there are so many reasons why this is just, even if you think about the countries people are coming from, they talk about the whole health sector and how we're very dependent on people, say Filipino nurses and maybe doctors from, the Indian subcontinent, for instance, and parts of Africa. But what's going on there? You're taking away vital nursing and doctor resources from those countries. Those countries are now going to struggle even more. They're already struggling. They're going to struggle even more because people like Clare Daly want to strip those countries of their best doctors and nurses. Okay? This is just common sense. This brain drain is so damaging for these countries. Countries which can totally, the last thing they need is to have the best, the brightest, the most capable people of their country stripped from them. You want people who are really capable to stay in those countries, to help those countries to climb up, to become more, effective, to become more efficient, to become more productive on the world scale. Their economies, they need these people, okay? You can't just strip those people from those countries and expect those countries to do well. I mean, this is theft. This is exploitation. Clare Daly is advocating for the exploitation of the most, underprivileged countries on earth. Essentially, that is what Clare Daly is advocating for. This is what I'm saying. Like I could not believe when I heard this. When I heard her talking about not just, status quo in terms of numbers, which is already causing enough pressure as it is, but ramping it up even more. It just beggars belief that someone who supposedly is informed would make such a nonsensical and anti-working class statement in regards to this whole situation. And it's, it is anti the poorest people in society, not just here, but also in these countries in the second and third world, like I just mentioned, because of this brain drain effect. And another thing to consider: when you bring more and more people into the country and thereby increase the population ever more, you're creating more demand, not just for housing, okay, not just for health services, education services, and all other services, but you're creating more demand for everything. So when you increase the demand for something, what's going to happen to the price? The price is going to go up, of course. Supply and demand again. So by bringing more and more people into the country and increasing the population year on year, significantly increasing it, as Clare Daly wants to do, you are going to drive up the price of everything. All services, all goods, all assets are going to go up when you increase the population, which is mostly coming from immigration, like I already mentioned. Okay, so Clare Daly is advocating for everyone having to pay more for everything. That is what she's saying. And who does that hurt the most? Again, the least well-off people in society, the working class people. They got to pay more for rent. They got to pay more in terms of house prices. Okay, they got to compete with ever more people in terms of housing resources, in terms of health resources, in terms of educational resources. Okay, they've got more and more competition for their jobs now. So you're going to have wage depression in general, which again hurts working class people the most. And the price of everything is going to go up because, like I mentioned, by bringing more and more people into the country, you increase demand for everything. So the supply, the price of that is going to go up across the board. Everything becomes dearer for everyone. The cost of living becomes more expensive for everyone, hurting the least well-off people in society the most. This is what Clare Daly is advocating. And to come back to the last point again, the whole green argument, okay, the whole environmental argument. You could not come up with a more damaging policy for the environment, for the countryside, for wildlife, for nature, for our natural resources, than to keep pumping ever more people into the country. It is the worst thing you could do in terms of looking after the environment. Because what's going to happen? People coming into Ireland, okay, they're coming in generally from second and third world countries, from less well-off countries into Ireland. They're going to increase their consumption. Okay, there's going to be more waste. There's going to be more pollution. All right, disaster. The very last thing, the very worst thing you could do for the environment, okay, you could not think of a less green policy than to keep increasing the population year on year, as Clare Daly wants to do. And like I mentioned, this increase in population is mostly coming from immigration. So we're talking about an increase in population coming from immigration, the least green policy you could think of, as well as all the other negative impacts I already mentioned across the board, which impact the most on the working class. This is what Clare Daly is advocating. She's advocating for making life ever more difficult, ever more expensive, ever more stressful for the least well-off people in society, ensuring there's more friction, ensuring there's more tension, ensuring there's more frustration, ensuring these protests will continue, ensuring there's ever more strife and unhappiness, particularly for the least well-off people in the country. Well done, Clare.